Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And last week, the most famous World of Tanks leaking website, which is called What Express, made a post saying that the current form of World of Tanks will end in 2025. Very dramatic, right? This post translated as, the usual World of Tanks will be closed in 2025. This is not a joke, but the near future. Those who carefully read the subtext have already understood this themselves. Here, you don't even need to go very far. World of Tanks is already preparing to move into a support stage, and then there will be maintenance only. Yes, we also wrote about this earlier, but the tankers are still flying in the clouds, so let them continue. So throw your money into a project which in about 1.5 years, well, you know, of course, they will deny everything. So this is not the first time that anyone has ever suggested that the juggernaut that is World of Tanks would be coming to an end. When I first started creating YouTube videos in 2012, I used to do some Q&As on the channel. And quite often people were asking, oh, what will you do after World of Tanks? And here I am in 2024 with absolutely no sign of the game slowing down in any single way. So whenever articles like this come up, I usually just brush them under the carpet. But interestingly enough, Andrew Lawler said, rumor has it that QB heard about Wargaming killing off World of Tanks in 2025 and he's been out on job interviews. Well, Andrew, thank you very much for the giggle. And I thought that today I'd actually look at the state of World of Tanks and whether there would be actually any truth in this doomsday post. So firstly, let me clarify that realistically, this is just click/rage bait intended to get attention from What Express. And congratulations, I guess they got me to make a whole YouTube video about it. Yeah, it is an interesting topic that I haven't really discussed in about half a decade, so I wanted to go research. So firstly, I'm going to play devil's advocate and think about all of the reasons that if this is true. And for some reason, some insider at World of Tanks decided to leak to What Express that they're going to be closing down the game in 2025, or at least slowing it down. So the reasons for this could be that maybe Wargaming have stretched themselves with leaving Russia or Belarus in 2022, and that having a Western development team is just too expensive. When you combine this with a dwindling player base around the world, and the game won't be profitable to develop as so actively in the future. In addition to this, perhaps Wargaming are looking at moving their developers onto Project CW, a new tank game developed by Wargaming, which I made a video on this channel a couple of weeks ago. However, realistically, I don't see that Wargaming are going to consider doing this unless Project CW becomes very successful. Wargaming have had tons of other projects along the way with, for example, Total War Arena, Pagan, buying out Atari and releasing like a revamped version of Master of Orion. They had a card game which was World of Tanks Generals, and that's just scratching the surface. They've done some side-scrolling shooters, lots of different games that frankly have just been, should we say, developed based on the success of their bread and butter, like World of Tanks and to a degree World of Warships. Undeniably, what keeps online active services going is users. If there aren't a huge number of users using the service, and there won't be any money that will flow into the company to be able to continue developing it. So I wanted to ask the question, how many players are actually playing World of Tanks? Now, Wargaming, like many companies, doesn't actually publish player numbers, especially so as they are actually a private company and not a public company, which is where a lot of people get the information on games like World of Warcraft, for example, when they're providing facts, figures, and insight to their shareholders. So there's many ways to guess how many active players are playing the game. One of the ways is that you could use whatcharts.eu, which actually has published for the last 6 years how many players have been playing on the total combined servers for each of the different regions. So we can see, for example, on the 3rd of January of this year, there were 215,000 people playing on the European server. If we take a look at the NA server, there were 18,573 peak players on the 3rd of January. And if we take a look at the Asia server, there were 14,451. Now, the issue is that this doesn't give an idea of overall player numbers. This is just the maximum number of players who are playing at any given time during the day, which is undoubtedly going to be the most popular time that people play video games, usually between about 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. at night when they come home, They want to play some games after dinner, before they're going to rest and go and have the rest of the day, getting ready to go to sleep and go to work tomorrow. So it would actually be really laughable to suggest that there were only 215,000 people playing World of Tanks on the European server. But then I actually had a pretty sneaky way to be able to calculate it, and that is Patton the Tank. If any of you don't know, recently Wargaming gave Patton the Tank to everyone who just clicked claim in the garage for the last week of 2023. And using an awesome website like Tomato GG, it actually scours the Wargaming API system to be able to get statistics of how many people have actually played Patton the Tank. And we can see here that it is the second most played medium tank of all time, with 636,000 different accounts playing Patton the Tank. So this might give an idea of how many players are actively playing, and as we can see, that number is much higher than the 200,000 peak players that you usually get on the European server. But here's the problem. We don't exactly know how many players who claimed Patton the Tank actually bothered to play it. And this is where it's useful to be a content creator, because I ran a poll on Twitter. I asked how many people who actually claimed Patton the Tank played at least one game in it, which would be the requirement for it to register on Wargaming's API system. And lo and behold, apparently only 30% of people have actually played Patton the Tank who claimed it inside the garage, with 70% of players just leaving it there to gather dust, probably where Patton the Tank deserves to be. Accordingly, we can use the fact that only 30% of players have actually played Patton the Tank to figure out how many players there actually have been playing on the European server in the week between Christmas and New Year. And I estimate it as 2.1 million players on the European server. Next, what we can do is combine the statistics that are available on what charts for the peak number of players who are playing World of Tanks at any one given time with the amount of players that I have estimated actually bothered to log in and claim Patton the Tank, which is that 2.1 million. What charts give statistics for the amount of peak players there are at any one given time for all of the different servers? Now, unfortunately, they haven't been tracking the statistics of players in the RU region since 2022. So accordingly, I'm going to be using the 3rd of January for this year for EU, NA, and Asia to calculate the peak players. But for the RU region, I'm going to be using the 3rd of January from 2 years ago, 2022. So factor that into any of your calculations as well. Therefore, if we add up all of these peak player numbers on the 3rd of January, we get a total server population of 781,968 at peak times during the day. Now, as a percentage of the world, a lot of you might be very surprised to find out that for the North American server only accounts for 2% of the global player base for World of Tanks. And for the Asia server, it's 1.85%, meaning that when you combine those two, only about 4% of players are actually playing outside the RU and the EU region. For EU, it's about 27% of global players, and the RU region still holds the majority, over 2/3 of actual World of Tanks players. Now, keep in mind that the RU region is now run by Leicester Studios and not run by Wargaming, but realistically, that doesn't make a difference. Wargaming will still, well, when I say Wargaming, shall I say Wargaming's owners and Leicester Studios owners will still benefit financially from the RU region. The main difference when Wargaming left Belarus and Russia is that now your money that goes into the World of Tanks machine goes to developers who are not in the RU region and not in the EU, well, not in the RU region and not in Belarus, and instead they're in the EU, they're in Ukraine, they're in the UK, they're in the US, all developing the game, and then they're paying taxes, which for me was one of the best things that Wargaming could ever do, because it means that we can all play World of Tanks and not feel that our money that we invest into the game is going into Russia in the form of taxes paid to developers there. But I digress. That's a completely different topic to talk about altogether. Accordingly, what you can do is you can take the peak number of players on the EU server and then take into account of how many players there actually were who logged in and clicked to claim Patton the Tank, which I'm estimating at 2.1 million, and realize that at any one given time, about 10% of the World of Tanks player base is actually logged in and playing it. And that would make perfect sense. I'd say the amount of time that somebody plays World of Tanks on average is about a couple of hours a day. And for everyone who doesn't play a couple of hours a day, there will be somebody who's playing like 6, 7, 8 hours to prop up the average. What this means is that if we use this Patton the Tank estimate of 2.1 million, I can then use this factor to be able to estimate how many players are playing in the RU region, the NA region, and the Asia region. And I estimate the total number of global World of Tanks players from Christmas until New Year's Day to be 7.7 million unique players who actually played the game. And let me clarify, I'm counting playing as just logging in and being part of the World of Tanks ecosystem. So that is a lot of people. So next, what you've got to try and ask is that if Wargaming wanted to stop developing World of Tanks, so they wanted to slow down development of World of Tanks, it would be because the game was not profitable. And so we can guess how much money Wargaming must make in a year by taking these player numbers and then guessing about how much average spending people put into World of Tanks. Now, I have to admit, one of the videos that I had the most fun making last year, and I'm really surprised at how few views it got. I'm sorry, I don't usually guilt trip all of you, but only 64,000 views on this video that lets you know exactly how much World of Tanks costs to play a year, if you're an economy player, if you're a tank collector. And I estimated that for the eco players, they spend about £206 a year on the high end or £169 a year on the low end. Whereas I estimated that the tank collectors were probably spending more like £1,000 a year. So please take that into account when we're trying to figure out, on average, how much money does somebody spend on World of Tanks a month? And to be an economy player, I'm averaging that it's about $20 a month to play World of Tanks. Whereas if you're a whale, I've got to times that out to be dollars, which is about 1.25 at the moment. It costs about $104 a month to be a whale in World of Tanks and collect everything as it goes along, and that's as cheaply as possible. Now, let me clarify. The majority of players don't actually spend any money on World of Tanks whatsoever. And so, while for every player who's dumping in $17 or $104 into World of Tanks a month, they are propping up the players who are spending nothing and increasing the average. Accordingly, if we take the total number of players who are playing World of Tanks at 7.7 million, and we multiply that by an average monthly spending of $5, that would mean that Wargaming are actually making $500 million. That's 462 million a year, which increases to 925 million if on average players are spending $10, which increases to 1.4 billion if players are spending $15 a month on average, and 1.8 billion if players are spending $20 a month on average, which I think would be far too much. My gut instinct is that the average is about $10, maybe possibly up towards the 15 mark. So I'd say that Wargaming are probably making about 1 to 1.2 billion from a World of Tanks. And let me clarify, this is just from the PC. This is not including World of Tanks Blitz. This is not including World of Tanks console. That is not including World of Warships. This truly is a massive game making massive amounts of money. And I think that the amount of money that people spend in World of Tanks is probably way higher than other free-to-play titles, because people feel so connected to the game, and Wargaming have a very lucrative audience from that perspective. The only things that I would be concerned about with what I'm trying to highlight here is that the amount of money that Wargaming make from World of Tanks for the NA and the Asia region is actually quite small. And so I think if there was anything to be concerned about, it's that how Wargaming can keep the NA and the Asia region being sustainable. I very much doubt if they're going to close the servers. I don't think that will happen at all. But what I do think is that Wargaming will have to standardize the client for, should we say, a Western and Eastern perspective, basically everything outside of RU. I do think we'll have one single client for EU, NA, and Asia, and they'll have the servers within the client, and you might even be able to play on the NA server even if you have an EU account. I do think that that's something that they will probably look into doing, as having localization in the NA and the Asia regions. Is it really worth it when they're only making $10 million a year? So to add any kind of significance to these estimates that I've made, I went and round digging on the internet. I found on Wikipedia that the last time that Wargaming declared their revenue, which was 217 million euros, that was in 2012, before World of Tanks even remotely took off. And as the company is private and not public, that's it from official information. However, interestingly, an article from QuoraMarketing.com, a gentleman called Michael Ahir managed to spot something that may or may not have been leaked from one of World of Tanks' directors, stating that World of Tanks, the franchise itself, has generated $7 billion. Now, firstly, let me clarify that the source that Quora Marketing used has now been changed. The World of Tanks franchise director, Chris Chung, made a post highlighting that World of Tanks has over 350 million registered players and 7 billion in cumulative revenue as of 2024. However, when I went to go and check the source myself, the post had been changed to not include any of this information. Accordingly, unless for some unknown reason Quora Marketing and Michael Ahir suddenly decided to fabricate a screenshot of the proud successes of the World of Tanks franchise director, then this would give us a further idea of how much money World of Tanks has generated Wargaming in revenue over the years. And honestly, 7 billion, it definitely looks within the ballpark. If we account for inflation over the years, there's no doubt that the roughly about 1 billion that World of Tanks makes Wargaming every year would scale down and would add very much weight to the 7 billion estimate that was posted up. But what's significant about this is not that they've made 7 billion, because maybe they made 4 of that in a year when the game was really successful and now it's winding down. But honestly, the player numbers in World of Tanks have stabilized very much so over the last few years, especially with the pandemic increasing the numbers, and also with regards to the European server, the huge influx of Ukrainians who left the Russian server to be able to come and join the EU server, and quite rightly. The only server that I'm truly worried about is quite often the amount of people playing on the NA server and the Asia server, because if those numbers continue to dwindle, it might get to the stage where players have to spend too long in the queue, and we all know what happens to multiplayer video games when you have to spend too long in the queue. So, to answer the question, is World of Tanks going to go on life support in 2025? I very much doubt it. World of Tanks is one of the most formulaic, easy, profitable things for wargaming to produce. They give us loot boxes every 3 months. They put in new tanks. They adjust the statistics. They add a few mechanics here and there. They change a few maps. They add a few game modes, which they've now got a whole catalog of game modes that they just keep bringing out. While a lot of what Express is quite often true, genuinely, I think they've really missed it with that post. As unless Wargaming have just completely lost it and for some reason want to go and cook their golden goose for dinner, I have no idea why a company that is so darn good at marketing and so darn good at making money would decide to suddenly close up shop on what might be their one-hit wonder. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was quintessential Excel baby answering a rumor and a question. And you know what? I'd like to give a big thank you to Andrew Laura for the good giggle about why I haven't been streaming so much recently. That's just because I've been playing the game too much. I needed some time off. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And I'm sure there'll be some really interesting comments down below about the state of World of Tanks. And are you surprised that Wargaming make arguably $1 billion each year just from World of Tanks PC? And if you're watching this video as it goes live on Friday, I'm going to be going live all day on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby with brand new drops shop so you can get yourself a 2D style and get yourself some extra tokens for the Japanese store that's currently going on in the game. So I'm really looking forward to being back and yeah, crushing a few tanks. I'm hopefully going to see you on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic. And I think I'll keep the day job, Andrew Laura.